All right, let's bring Tab Ramos back on to the show. Tab.
Can you hear me? I'm not sure what happened.
Yeah, it's all good.
Yeah.
It's all good. We were, a little bit of some crispiness in the audio, but it's all good. It's all fixed now.
All right.
But Tony wanted to hear the back end of your answer because it got cut off while you were chatting.
Yeah, I'm not sure where I got cut off, but the gist of it was, we started with young players after 2018, which is a great idea because we had just failed to qualify. And we went into the 2022 qualifiers thinking it's a young team. We barely qualified. We were third place in CONCACAF, tied with the fourth place team, which was Costa Rica, but by goal difference, we made it as automatic team. We tucked all of that under. We're just a young team. But yet a year and a half later, we're still in the same place where, our team was really not playing great. We went into the World Cup after playing, I believe, Japan and Saudi Arabia right before the World Cup and did not do well in those games either. The World Cup was average. And then after the World Cup, we've been average. And so maybe, I'm starting to think that maybe we've reached our limit with this group. And I think, as we look into next year, maybe we're looking at, hopefully, obviously, we're going to get out of the first round because the World Cup's 48 teams. Hopefully, we'll win the first game, which will get us sort of to the same place where we usually are. And the question is going to be, can we win that second game this time and get to the quarterfinals? And we may. I think the concern for me is more that we just don't have the momentum going into this World Cup. And that's really what I was hoping for, because it's more about the sport, really, than it is just about this team.
So, Tap, you had the opportunity to be around a lot of these players when you were coaching the U20s, when you're the youth technical director. I don't know what your role was specifically. I assume identifying talent and trying to foster that talent to be contributing members of the full team, which I feel like you've done an excellent job of. But was there something that you were seeing during that process where, like, all these kids kind of look the same? I mean, is there something going on with the system right now that's lending itself to us kind of churning out very similar players and player profiles?
Well, I made, this is a great question. And I mentioned this a little bit the other day. There was one main concern that I had, and that was about the development academy and the players. Because I felt like when I went to watch development academy games, the kids didn't actually really care that much whether they won or lost the games. There wasn't, that slide tackle that saves the game. There wasn't those matchups, that real fiery feel of two teams wanting to beat each other. I didn't see that, and I thought we lacked there. And that was a concern for me, which I voiced many times. But obviously, U.S. soccer was sort of in a different mode than my thinking. And of course, because, my thinking is just about me thinking it with my experiences. And other people have other experiences. And I'm not saying I'm right and somebody else is wrong. But what I'm saying is my opinion was different on what was happening. I wanted players that were more aggressive. It doesn't mean that you can't be as good. It doesn't mean that you can't be as technical. But when sometimes at U.S. Soccer, our focus was starting to become, like, for example, bio-banding, right? Okay, having players play down, which I think it's great for the general public, right? So there's two ways to think. One is for general public, the rec, the travel player. That's great. Not competitive, don't keep score. Winning is not important. That's great. I'm talking about elite player development. That's what I'm focused on. Elite player development. Look at where the great players from around the world, where they come from. They come from environments which they have to fight every day. And that was my concern. My concern was we didn't have the fight. We were starting to not have the fight. And I think maybe we're seeing a little bit of that reflection now. And by the way, just yesterday, MLS announces MLS Next, which, by the way, at 14 and under, they don't have standings. Just yesterday, they announced they have quality of play rankings. Great. This is what happens when you have maybe a few Ivy League guys with math degrees sitting in a room agreeing with each other that this is a great idea. And by the way, great idea for the general public so the kids learn how to make passes. But man, this is MLS Next. These are the guys that you wanna groom to be pros. And you're gonna give them a cookie because they made a nice pass? I'm sorry, man. That's not my thinking.
Tell that to Stoke City on a Monday night. You know what I mean?
I thought it was a Wednesday night, but okay.
I'm taking it to the extreme on a Monday night. Okay. So in saying that, Tab, I look at these player profiles. Have we plateaued? Because I look back to when we were playing youth national teams, 2005 U20 World Cup, 2003 U17 World Cup with Freddie Adu when he came out on the world scene. It felt like, okay, Freddie was one of those players that, hey, everyone knew we're starting to generate these players who can compete at the highest level and maybe potentially play on these Champions League clubs, but different types of players. Over the last, 5-10 years, we're not seeing the players take that next step. So what's missing at that level? How are we not creating more goal scorers? Well, the big question is, are we creating enough number 10s? We have Gio Reyna in the player pool, and if he's not playing, who the hell else can create like he can, right? Where are the different type of 9s that we have, goal scorers? What is the main issue? Is it we don't have that one Clairefontaine Academy where we're having elite coaches with elite players and we're playing for something, like you said, versus, hey, everyone, we just want to play pretty.
Well, I mean, look, quality of play rankings, right? What's going to happen with that? I would like for somebody to actually say, I did this. Somebody put a name on whoever came up with the idea, because what's going to happen is the coaches now are going to allow players to be even less creative than before. Now it's going to be quality of play ranking. You don't keep standings already. It doesn't matter who wins, but now it's how pretty the game is going to be, even more than before. So chances are, if you have a winger who can take people on and loses the ball, 8 out of 10 times, that guy's not going to play anymore now. That's what I'm thinking. So what has happened? Look, and Charlie, this is because you asked the question. I think players today are more capable than players in the past. I'll be honest. When I look around the country, when we were growing up, Tony and I and Connie, there was a lot of skillful players, but in general, there weren't a lot of players in the country who could receive a ball and play a nice pass and move a ball around and keep possession. This was all foreign stuff. Now all of our players can do it. But now we're not developing those players that you're talking about, Charlie, because now things are easy and you get rewarded for keeping possession rather than for making plays that potentially win a game. And so
taking the risks.
Look, yeah, that's the risk. And now with what came out yesterday, I'm puzzled by this stuff. I really am.
Yeah, if I could tell, Tab sent that to me yesterday, and we were discussing this, and I'm just shocked by the whole thing. But if I could just go back, so when Tab had the youth national teams, one of the things he implemented was he wanted, and he can tell you why. I just know he did it. He wanted ex-national team players in and around the group, right? And made it a point that when you went to a meal room, there would be players all hanging on the wall, literally pictures hanging on the wall. But we did this thing one year. What did you call it, Tab? A summit? Was it the summit? I forget what the name. Yeah, so it was a national team summit, right? So Tab decided we were going to bring all of the youth national teams together, and we were going to work in the same environment. And it was great for me because I got to sit personally. I got to sit with all the coaches at night and do this thing. But the one when we went to scout these events in Florida, we would sit in a room at night with, 15 scouts, Tab, maybe that you brought in, however many, it doesn't matter. And by day 2, the question to Tab's point was, who looks different? Did anyone find any player that looks different from the rest of the players? And it stuck with me because now listening to what you say, Tab, about these guys being developed the same way, we were literally looking for this. We saw hundreds of players a day. Everyone looked exactly the same. Every game looked exactly the same. Every player looked exactly the same. And you are looking for the guy that could kind of separate themselves from the group.
Yeah, no doubt. And I encourage the coaches to look for that, to not be afraid to look for players who, for example, lost the ball at times, who took chances more than other guys. because now we're at a point, and to Charlie's point before, now we're at a point where, sure, we can find players on any team that can keep possession. That's fine. But let's look for the other guys. What are we doing to make sure that we develop the other guys? And I'm not sure that the door is clearly open with some of the rules that we're putting in place. So maybe we can have, of course, some of the Ivy League guys with their math degrees in there. But how about we mix those in with some guys who have been there and done that, and like in the wars, So I think we need a combination of both.
And real quick, talk about. Sorry, Jim. Talk about why it was important to you. You've explained it to me, but why it was important to you to have. And I was a benefactor of this. Just to be transparent, but it was me, Marcelo Balbo. I mean, you had everybody. I could go down the list. Why it was important to you? Because I don't see it now with the national team. I'll be honest. I'm sure the youth national team coaches right now are really good coaches. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if there's anyone in that room that those kids look up to and go, they look up and go, I can learn from this guy, but I want to be where that guy was, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know that we have that now.
Well, I mean, I think we're all a reflection of our environment, right? And that was kind of my environment. I always looked up to great players. I always, wanted to follow the examples of guys who had done something different. And I think maybe that's the reason why I try to express myself through coaching sort of the same way I express myself through playing. And I think we probably all do the same. But this is likely the reason why most like defensive midfielders, center backs, goalkeepers become head coaches, because they're the ones who read the game the best. I don't think necessarily I was good at that. But I think that's why most of the coaches likely come from those positions. So for me, it was just really a reflection of my environment.
All right. So Tab, I have somewhat of a solution, I think, in my head, and I want to get your thoughts, obviously, given your vast experience, especially in the youth side of the game and development in particular. There's an issue that I'm seeing across the country, and I think it's in a thirst to almost quantity over quality. I dropped my kid off at a local soccer practice. There's 4 teams on one field, sometimes more, sometimes 6.
Hey, I'm dealing with this too. So
it's super frustrating. And what it bothers me most about it is that there's a stat that I saw, okay, that in a 90-minute game, a professional player will touch the ball for 2 minutes. Okay. So our younger players probably touching the ball less. So okay, in the course of a game, what we're teaching our kids when we only have that much space to work on in practice is the 2 minutes. What about the other 88 minutes? Situational awareness, spatial awareness, team shape, in-game management, how to win, holding a high line. All these, we can never work on this stuff. So in fairness to all the coaches out there that are suffering in this, including Chuck over here, it drives me absolutely crazy, because we're not allowing our kids to actually learn how to play the game properly and in all facets of the game until they're actually playing a real game where parents are watching, coaches are yelling different shit than they did before, that the stakes are heightened. It's a terrible learning environment. And so I want to know how you solve that, because if we can get to that, and I know that's a little bit maybe not towards the elite player, but I think we could maybe have some elite players emerge if they were actually being taught properly.
Well, it applies to all players. You have to think of the game as, first it's you and the ball, right? Then it's you, the ball, and an opponent, right? Then it's you, the ball, an opponent, and a goal, right? And then it's you, the ball, an opponent, a goal there, and a goal here. And that teaches you everything. Then all you do is add one more. Now it's 2v1. Now it's 2v2. By the time you get to 3v3, you learn everything. All of the things you just mentioned, spacing, everything. It's just now you have to apply it to a bigger field. But that's really where the game starts. So I personally not a fan of going out and seeing, 10, let's say 9 to 12-year-olds going into the session and seeing all these cones on the field like a plane's going to land, right? There's all these drills. When really, and by the way, all the respect to the coaches, because the coaches kind of have to do this, because at the end of the day, most parents are thinking, hey, there's a lot of cones. This must be a good coach. We're doing all these great exercises. This must be a great coach. If Charlie, if you go now to Europe, like you're saying, you're going to take your UEFA licenses, you go and take your UEFA licenses, and now you come back home and you're coaching the kids or the team that you're coaching, and all of a sudden all you're doing is small-sided games. People are going to think like, what did you learn, Charlie? You learned nothing. But yet small-sided games is probably what's teaching the kids the most they can learn. And I think because of a little bit of the overcoaching is taking all the time away from the kids being on actual game situations.
100%. And I want to take it to this current squad and what you've seen from them in youth development to bringing them on your U20 squad to where they are now. In particular, I look at Timothy Weah, Serginho Dest, Chris Richards. I mean, Serginho Dest just getting back from injury. But, a Mark McKenzie, a Richie Ledesma. When you look at them, why do you think Richie Ledesma hasn't been brought into the squad when he's playing consistently? What have you made of Timothy Weah and his introduction in this squad? Because it felt like in the Nations League, as bad as the U.S. were playing, it felt like Timothy Weah was one of the players who was trying to make things happen. And if it wasn't him, then you weren't getting anyone trying to run at players or take those necessary risks in 1v1 situations. But have you seen them grow the way that you had hoped? Do you think they can give more? How much more can a player give in terms of their potential with the players that you've coached so far? Because I think Mark McKenzie is another one who's come a long way.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I don't think that they've come along as far as I had hoped, but also, as far as most people had hoped, because what they had done on the youth. I mean, our youth programs were consistently, quarterfinalists at World Cups. And that's putting yourself, amongst the final 8. And I think a couple of the times we had a legitimate shot at winning the whole thing. I mean, sometimes you lose a game that you're supposed to win. But in general, I expected more. And I think, when you look at Timothy Weah, for example, for me, Timmy was one of those players, almost like when you put Alka-Seltzer in a glass, right? You put it in there, and all of a sudden things happen. And I think Weah is that kind of player. You just have to, you keep him wide, you keep him high, and he's the guy that's going to provide something that no one else can do. So Serginho Dest is a little bit the same, where you don't know what to expect. He lacks a little bit on the defensive side, but he provides so much on the attacking end. I personally like the players who don't know what they're doing next. And I think Serginho Dest is one of those, where he doesn't know what's happening next. And because he doesn't know, of course, the other team's never going to know what he's doing, right? Now, when I look at the rest of the team, Anthony Robinson has been the most consistent and the best player we've had for the last 6 years. I will argue that with anyone. He has been the best, but he has also been the best overseas. When you watch him play and you watch Fulham play, he's a great player there, like every week. And so I think what we lack right now, it's a little bit more of the guys who want to put the team on their shoulders. We just don't have enough of that. And that doesn't mean that you have to kick anybody. It doesn't have to mean you have to tackle somebody. It just means that, somebody's going to take over and say, we're not losing games anymore. That's it. And, but most of our players don't do that overseas. So it's a very hard ask.
All right, we are not ending this conversation with Tab. We got more of Tab right after this break, so do not go anywhere.
She knows, and I know she knows.
All right, welcome back in to Call It What You Want, or as our friend Johnny Bornstein would call it what it is. I'm Jimmy Conrad alongside Charlie Davies and Tony Miola, and our special guest, Tab Ramos, who has seen and done it all. Tab, we thank you so much for your time. Now, before the break, and I want you to kind of elaborate on this a little bit more. You mentioned that we don't have players that know how to take over a game, or not enough of them. Does that give you some serious concern a year out from the World Cup? Because we're kind of in this purgatory. I don't know if purgatory is the right word, but do we go try to find those players, or do we just try to make that mentality out of the ones that we already have? We're in a really interesting position in timing right now.
I don't necessarily think, and I've heard this from a lot of people, hey, we just have to bring in all these new players. These players just not, I think that our best players are there. They're at camp. I mean, could we be missing one or two? You know, could Paredes turn into a great player that maybe ends up, making the difference at the World Cup, or could another young player potentially step in a year from now and make us a little different? Can Gio Reyna finally play 30 or 40 games in a row somewhere where he can come back and help us a little bit? I mean, all these things can happen potentially, but in general, our best players are there. Their personality is what it is. I just think that we have a great coach. I think there's no arguing that Pochettino has the background for that, and I don't think we can necessarily argue that. But it's a matter of him now getting to learn the players that he has and getting the most out of this group. Because what for me the biggest concern, without a doubt, is the lack of momentum that we have as a nation moving towards World Cup 2026.
What excites you about this group? What if you're a fan of this group? Obviously, we know the moment we're in right now. We've seen guys maybe play well at their club teams, but not necessarily with the national team. Your theory about they don't do a lot of great things with their club teams, and that's what we're seeing with the national. But what if you're a fan and you want to engage yourself to this team? What excites you about it?
I love that question because we don't ask that enough. I mean, I think our fans need to enjoy Christian Pulisic as much as they can. I mean, Christian is a great player. A lot of this has fallen on his shoulders, obviously, because sometimes he wears the captain's band. He doesn't necessarily have the personality for that, but sometimes you just give the captain's band to your best player, right? He's the best player, so wear the band. I think we need to enjoy him. I think, when Pepi's in good form, I think he's an exciting player to watch. He does a lot for the team, not just score goals. I think Anthony Robinson is a legit, potentially maybe the best outside back we've ever had, and we've had some good ones. I think McKennie is a player that can be a lot like Jermaine Jones. I just hope, I watch him play, and even when I watch him play at Juve, I'm not sure his fitness is great. When is that bell going to go off where he's going to say, I'm going to take over games? When is Tyler Adams going to take over games? But these are all the asks that we have. But listen, without a doubt, let's not forget that these are good players. We have good players, and I think the fans should be excited to see these guys play.
I'm really curious, Tab, because you were one of the greatest midfielders that we ever had, and I wish I had more time to watch you and digest how you anticipated plays and how you were able to break down teams. But looking at this current group in the midfield, and I think the midfield is by far our strength. We have the most talent, the deepest players in midfield. So if you're looking at the U.S. currently, how would you play? Would you play with three in there? Would you play in a 3-5-2? Would you play in a 3-4-3? Would you play in a 4-4-2? And what would that midfield look like between Adams, McKennie, Musah, Cardoso, Tessman, Reyna? Would you bring Christian in as a 10? Would you keep him wide? These are some of the conversations going on right now.
Yeah, sometimes when I watch Musah playing wide, I cringe a little bit, and this is not doubting Pochettino. It's just like not what I would do. I continue to think that Musah is not a wide player, regardless of what he does there. And of course, you always depend on the system, because if, maybe Pochettino wants to attack up the left side a lot and wants Musah to tuck into midfield to protect the area, that's why he plays wide. You always have to understand that the coaches, there's a reason why they do what they do, even if it doesn't make sense to the rest of us. But I think that the answer of that to that question for me is easy. I think it's, how do we fit all of our best players on the field and have them be in the position where they can deliver the most to us? And I think at this point, I would have to say, to specifically answer your question, I think that there's no doubt that for me, Tyler Adams, Musah, and McKennie have to play in the midfield. And that could be a triangle where they can, all three of them, switch positions in a triangle. Two pressure one time, one can go, one can stay. Any of the three can stay. Any of the three can go. And then you let Christian have like a free roll coming in from either the left side or the right side. Doesn't really matter. I think it'll depend on where Weah feels the most comfortable to play the opposite side and be all the way wide so that he can be a threat behind. I think that's how I would line it up. I don't think there's any secrets, and I think likely most of you will agree with that.
All right, so Tab, I think this is a question I get a lot. It's more about why do these guys play better for their clubs than they do for their national team? Do you have any insight on that? What's your gut telling you about why that happens?
I would say that I don't agree with that. I say that I watch these players play overseas and they do a nice job for their teams. And when they come home and do just a nice job for us, we just don't, it's just not good enough when you add all the nice jobs together. You know, you don't have guys overseas completely taking over games. You know, if you watch, you know, and I love Tyler Adams, one of the best, like, you know, if I had to start a team, I'd start with him. You know, I watch him play for Bournemouth. He rarely touches the ball. You know, he's rarely involved in the play. So when he comes here and he does the same for the national team, we're like, what happened to Tyler Adams? Well, nothing happened. He's playing his game. That's how he plays overseas. And so I would just argue with the premise that they're not playing as well. I think they're playing just as well, but the games here are hard. You got all three of you guys have lived them. CONCACAF is hard, and you have to come back and make a difference. We need guys to make a difference, and we're just not doing that.
What do you think about the number 9 position? We've talked about this. Who's your starter when everyone's healthy? And is there enough support for that number 9 in this current system? Is this more about players on the wings taking more risks, or are we using him as a pivot for hold up play? Because not all of them are talented enough or have the quality enough to, at the international stage, to hold off these center backs or occupy too. So who's your guy and why?
Yeah, I think you answered that question a little bit by just saying it's what the coach wants, right? I think that Josh Sargent is taking a beating right now just because obviously he hasn't scored in a long time. That's not a good thing for a number 9. Mm-hmm. But Josh Sargent is a good number 9. You know, I think Flo Balogun is a good number 9. I think we have good competition for that role. But if I had to pick one, I would pick Pepi. Pepi's the one has come up big for us already going back to 2022. Likely should have been, 2021 and qualifiers, he likely should have been on the 2022 team. Unfortunately, he didn't make that team. He didn't get selected. But I think if I had to pick one at this point, I would go with Pepi.
All right, so Gio Reyna, probably the biggest enigma on our team. Clearly talented, but doesn't always seem to have the body language that matches that talent. Sometimes looks disinterested. What do you do with him right now, Tab, at this point? Obviously, he's got to move to another club. As you mentioned before, got to get 30, 40 games in a row and start to really establish himself, but also just establish a rhythm of being the guy game in and game out. But if he can't find that, I just don't know if we can depend on him to do anything of consequence in the World Cup. However, he's one of the few players that plays better for his national team, or at least it feels that way, than he does for his club.
Yeah, it's something that has been a big question mark for all of us for a long time now. And, you know, I was doing a game for TV about 6 months ago, and I happened to look at his stats and then realized he hadn't really played a 90-minute game overseas in, I think, years. Or maybe he played 1 or 2 in like the last 3 or 4 years. So I think, you know, and you know, this is just me at this point. I think we can't, there's no question that we can't count on him at this point. I think maybe what we saw 4 or 5 years ago was likely an opinion that we built up more on potential than it was the actual playing of the field. If you guys recall, he made a great play in Mexico where he dribbled a bunch of guys up the field and you know, got through 4 or 5 guys, and we're like, wow, look what he can do. That play ended up in nothing, by the way, but we're all thinking, hey, this is what he can do. Wait till he gets but now it's time to deliver. And I think, you know, like you said, Jimmy, I think it's time for him to go somewhere and play consistently 90-minute games, 30, 40, 50, 90-minute games. And then we see what we have. There's no question he has skills, but there, you know, there's a lot of players with skill. I think it's time to focus on the other guys that we have and let him sort of figure out his way on the club side.
All right. I know we've let Tones has been nice. He says he talks to you a lot, so he's not answering or asking any questions right now. But do you have any good? Let's pretend Tony's not here. Do you have any good Tony Meola stories, especially young Tony?
I didn't leave it open for that. I was at one of you guys ask other questions.
Any good young Tony Meola stories where he's got a ponytail or doing something crazy? What do you got for us, Pat?
No. But we come from a generation which we all yell at each other constantly for a bad pass or not, just because you didn't get the right pass in the right spot, and Tony was always in the back, always with the, come on, man, to everybody. Like, no matter what, even if a shot came from 40 yards away, he's like, how come, nobody blocked that. So we're at a training session with the Metro Stars one time, and Tony and Alexi Lalas had just gotten traded to us. And Tony, we're playing like that double, big goal game or whatever. And Tony gets a ball from the back and throws it out and throws it too far for Alexi to get. And I remember that Tony goes to Alexi, come on, man. And Alexi turns around. He's like, are you talking to me? And it's the first time where I saw Tony go, no, it's all good. I saw Tony do that because he always killed everybody. But that time with Alexi, he did not.
That's hilarious.
Wow.
I don't remember it.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't remember
Wow,
it.
Tony.
Wow,
You didn't want any problems, huh, Tony?
That's
Did
it,
money.
man.
Did money heat from the redhead. I love that.
Jeez.
That's a great story.
My favorite tab? Can I give you my favorite tab story?
Yes. Yeah.
So we're up in New England, and what's his name? The left back, Teddy Chronopoulos.
Oh yeah,
is literally kicking. When I say literally kicking Tab every which way you can, and this comes off the heels of, I don't know if you remember, Tab. There was a corner kick in New England, and somehow they had Tab marking at the front post.
Oh, I remember
the front six, and his ball's whipped in on the ground, and I go down, and Tab's left foot was for standing only, standing purposes only, and he sticks his left foot out and deflects it. So he's so pissed off. Teddy Chronopoulos is kicking him. All of a sudden, I don't know, it's probably the eighth foul that didn't get called, because that was the only way you could stop him, was to kick him. And Tab stops. He takes off his shirt in the game and gives it to Teddy Chronopoulos in the game. He says, he goes, here, I'm going to give you my shirt.
He was pulling my shirt the whole game. I finally just took it off and gave it to him.
You haven't seen that in the middle of a game, have you?
No, that's class.
Amazing.
Wow,
that is amazing.
So Tab, I have a question. Let's say you're the coach currently for the U.S. Women's National Team. You have some guys who are playing consistently. Then you have some guys who are not, and they know the World Cup's next summer. What are you recommending they do? Are you telling them, hey, come to MLS? Are you saying, hey, go to the Belgian league, the Eredivisie in Holland? What would you want them to stay in Europe? Would you want them to come back where they'd be guaranteed playing time, but maybe not the competition and everyday practice isn't the same? Are you more about, hey, I want them to be in a rhythm to play every week rather than competing every single day in this environment that it's so uncertain. You don't know what the sporting director wants or the head coach wants, or there are some times where there are things that are out of the player's control and your control. So what would you recommend for some of these guys? A guy like Gio Reyna, for instance.
Well, the all environments are different, so it's hard to recommend. It depends on the player. It depends on the situation. And it depends what country in Europe, what club you go to, how much you're going to play. I think, because you're asking about Gio Reyna at this point, I would say for him, I'd like to see if he could go to the Dutch league or to go to Serie A where other American players are having some success, and see if he can get on a team where he can play all of the games. And the reason I would say that over MLS is not necessarily because those leagues are better, because I think, MLS has become very, very competitive, and it's a good league. But I think the pressure overseas is about winning your position every week. So every day that you're training, you're winning a position to play on the weekend. And I'm not sure that MLS really operates that way. I don't think there's as much competition day in and day out to play. So I would say in general, I would favor towards being in Europe, but it would have to be in a good.
What about for your goalkeepers? Because I see a lot of people in the chat saying, hey, Matt Turner needs to come back to MLS. Enough of that. Would you, as national team coach, say, hey, my keepers, I don't mind them coming back to MLS.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And, by the way, I'll make this reference that, in the past, as good as we think we were at all our generations, we depended on our goalkeepers making big saves every game pretty much. And that's pretty much for all of our generations. And some were better than others, right? But and now we can't do that anymore. And that changes games sometimes, and that's a big drawback. But there's no question that the goalkeeping position, if there's any position on the field where you want someone playing every day, I mean, Tony will answer obviously this much better, but I would not want to play a goalkeeper who's not playing.
Yeah, no, 100%. All right, Tab. Before we let you go, we have two things for you. One is a tradition here on the show. It's your favorite jersey swap. Now, it might be Teddy Chronopoulos based on the story that Tony just said, because it's got a nice backstory. But do you have a jersey swap, or maybe somebody turned you down? We've heard some great stories in that capacity as well. But I know you've played against some of the world's best. So what do you got for us?
Well, I do have some good jerseys. But I would tell you a little story about the one I have that I think it's a little bit of a funny one. So in 1990, we played Italy in Rome, and I exchanged jerseys with Roberto Donadoni.
Wow.
Wow. Forget it.
Wow.
Like, hero, like world superstar. Well, so Roberto and I with Tony end up playing together at Metro Stars, 6 or 7 years later. So I go to Roberto, I go, "Hey, Roberto, remember we exchanged jerseys? I have your jersey." And he's like, "No, I have no idea I had yours."
That's kind of like
we threw him on away or he didn't have it. But
that's like both sides. You actually got a great jersey, but then also he turned you down in some capacity.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a first here on the show. That's
awesome.
Amazing.
Yeah,
what a story.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the last thing we want to do with you is to build the ultimate U.S. men's national team player of all time. So who do you think is the best header of all time? Who would you go with heading?
Heading. I would have to say Alexi.
Okay. How about shooting? You can include yourself, because I know you've hit some bangers in your day.
Shooting, I would say Clint Mathis.
Clint was very good. He didn't get talked about enough. He's super talented.
No, he doesn't get mentioned enough.
Same with Tab. So I'll throw Tab into that conversation too. Set pieces. Who is the guy for set pieces?
Set pieces, I would say Clint Mathis also. By the way, right-footed and left-footed.
Yeah, he had it both. Dribbling, I'm not even going to let you answer it. I'm going to say Tab Ramos. Defending, who's the best defender?
The best defender.
EP.
Putting me on the spot.
Eddie
here.
Pope. Eddie Pope.
I would say Eddie Pope and Fernando Clavijo.
Clavijo. I've heard Clavijo. Tony's been talking about him as well. Okay, who has the best engine? Who could just run for days?
I would say John Harkes.
Oh, Frankie Hayduk takes the cake with that. I'll tell you. I've seen Frankie
Hayduk
Frankie Hayduk on negative could still run a marathon. I mean,
no, you know what? That's fair. That's fair. And also, Chris Henderson was a little bit like Hayduk, where they could run all day.
True. Yeah. Hendy could run for days.
Frankie was sick.
How about trash talk? Who is the best you've been around for trash talk? Or who would you want?
Oh, trash talk. Wow, that would be all of us back in the 90s. That's hard to say. That would be really hard. That's
all right.
If you had one, who talked them, you knew that was something was coming out during play.
I would say I would have to be up there.
Okay. I respect it.
If I'm going to pick myself for a category, that's one of them.
Okay.
All right. Who is best at making the final pass? Just kind of had that vision and could see the game.
Did you see Tab's assist in the '94 World Cup?
I did.
That might be up there for me. But go ahead.
Final pass. I'm not sure. It's hard.
I will say Tab Ramos then, because I know he's thinking, I got this in my bag.
What about, hey, Tab, what about Hugo Perez in his prime?
I would have picked him for dribbling. Jimmy gave me the nod, but I would have picked Hugo. Hugo was the guy
he was good,
I sort of looked up to when it came to dribbling, and I would have to put Preki as the next guy that could just, obviously everybody knows Preki could chop everybody up all the time.
Okay, and then mentality. Who is the toughest? The toughest you've been around?
The toughest I've been around, I would have to say Jermaine Jones.
That's a great one.
That's a tough cookie, man.
Yeah.
What about technical ability? Just technique.
Technique, Hugo Perez. Hugo Perez, and I would say close second, I would go to Clint Mathis. See, I know that I mentioned Clint a couple of times. Clint Mathis, for me, was the best American player that I ever played with. It's just his career was very short because he had, Clint, because he has personality going on. But Clint was one of the best at dribbling, one of the best at passing, one of the best shooters. He was good in the air. He had speed. He had it all. He had it all to be the best player. Yeah.
I think John O'Brien deserves a shout for technique as well.
Yeah, he's a good player as well.
Yeah. A little bit more defensive than Clint, obviously.
Yeah.
Clint was more final third.
Well, Tab, thank you so much for your time. We know you got some things to take care of later today. We want to have you on the show at some point.
Yeah.
But this has been awesome. Tab Ramos, everybody.
Thanks, buddy.
All
right, we're going to take our last break. Call what you want. When we come back, we're going to talk about Tab when he's not here. It's going to be awesome. Don't go anywhere.
See ya.
The clock never stops. Relive the greatest moments with uninterrupted highlights and more.
It's Gareth Bale. Ronaldo. Wonderful goal.
On the UEFA Champions League channel. Streaming free.
All right, welcome back in to Call What You Want. I'm Conrad Dino alongside Chuck Wagon and Big Tones. Tones, thank you so much for getting Tab on the show. I did want to say something about Clint Mathis because I had the opportunity. Now, this is before he tore his ACL, and maybe that slowed him down a little bit. But when he was on the Galaxy, I was training with them, and I was still trying.
What year?
This was what, 98 or 99. This is one of the early years of Clint, but and of me as well. And I would just marvel at his off the ball movement and just his understanding of timing and space. And then obviously he had all the things that Tab was talking about in terms of skill and finishing ability and both feet. And I was like, if I'm going to get to where I want to go, I got to be able to mark guys like this guy. So shout out to Clint Mathis. I don't think he gets brought up enough. And again, I'm glad I got to say that to Tab. He's another one that needs to be brought into the conversation as one of the best this country's ever produced. But Tones, thank you so much for helping us get Tab on the show.
Yeah, no worries. Believe me, if you guys would have sent him a text too, he would have came on. I just had the pleasure of sending him a text, so he would have done it for you. But I've been saying this forever, and I know there's not a ton of video out there, but everyone asks who I think the best two U.S. players of all time are, and I've said forever, Clint Dempsey and Tab Ramos. Those are my two guys. Has nothing to do with them. I'm a friend of them. I was lucky to play with him. I'm lucky to live a post-career life with him as one. I would think we both think we're one of our best friends and all that stuff. But he was exceptional, and I've said time and time again, we have not created another Tab Ramos, and probably because of the discussion we just had for an hour. Right, probably because of the way that we're raising kids. We grew up playing in the street. If you ever watch Soccer Town USA, you can go to YouTube and watch it. You'll see the environment we grew up. It's about an hour documentary. We had no structure. We had nothing. We just learned it on our own, and I think we miss all of that, and we miss it dearly to develop creative players because we're always told what to do.
What's interesting, Tones, is that when people ask about, I'm sure you guys get these same questions. Like, what were you doing when you were a kid? Like, what's the shortcuts? What are all the secrets? And for me, I was practicing Tuesday, Thursdays, and like one game on the weekend. But in between those other days, I was out in the street playing. It wasn't necessarily soccer. I was playing flag football, 3 flies up. You're playing over the line, which is like a baseball game. But what's interesting is that you're still solving problems in those games. You're also trying to figure out ways to win, right? And to get the best of your teammates, how you manage disappointment when you fail, and then your friends are giving you a hard time. Like, these are all important things that in some ways we're trying to bring that into an environment instead of allowing it to happen naturally. Chuck, was there anything that Tab said that stuck out for you?
I think everything that he said had a lot of value to it. And it's just, I love when we bring in people with different perspectives who also have the experience that we had playing, with the national team. He coached these guys too. So, I think he brings a lot of great insight. And so I think what stands out to me is maybe the lack of different player profiles and how everybody's coaching the same type of players, which is something that I'm trying to break the mold of currently as I coach. Is like, guys, we can't all play the same. And guys, I want us taking risks. I do a lot of 1v1 stuff. We need more players who can create off the dribble. I'm so sick of seeing the same one touch, two touch, same player movements. Let's make this like so robotic. No, the game is not meant to be robotic. The way I fell in love with the game is watching the Brazilians in the early days. And it's all samba and flow and creativity. Sure, you had the Dungas every now and then. You had, Gilberto Silvas. You had to have players like that. The Lucios. But also it came with Ronaldinhos and Ronaldos and Rivaldos and Robinhos. And you're seeing that type of player where you don't know what to expect. It's spontaneous. Like, we need more of that. So I'm trying to coach kids to be expressive and try different things. Don't be afraid to lose the ball. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. That's how we have to have, more coaches, making sure they're preaching that. It's okay to lose the ball, win it back, and go again, right? So I think that's something that really stands out to me.
What stands out for me is that we're talking with this guy, Tab Ramos, who has so much experience and has seen the game at all levels, both as a player and as a coach. And yet he's not coaching anywhere, or he doesn't seem to be involved in any real capacity. And that bums me out, Big Tones. And I meant to ask him that, but I knew that he had to go. So we got into our fun questions there at the end. I don't know if you can shed any insight onto
how
that can be remotely possible.
Yeah, I talk to him about this all the time. He got his chance in Houston, right, with a poor team and didn't improve it, and he thinks that was a black eye for him, and kind of just wrote him out. I mean, he was in Hartford too, but I don't know how you judge those jobs when your team doesn't spend any money at all. You're fighting for things every day for training and to have for just the essentials for your players. Like, I don't know how you judge those jobs. But yeah, I think his time, we didn't get into his time at US Soccer and how he got ridden out of there, when we're still at a point where his national teams, he mentioned, he brushed over it. I wish he gave himself more credit. We went 3 cycles where our U17s and U20s were in the quarterfinals of each of those World Cups. So 6 times, right? If you think about that, only one other country in the world did that, has ever done that. That's England. And they won 2 World Cups in that period. They won a 17s and they won a 20s. Not Brazil, not Nigeria, not Germany, not any of the powerhouses of the Youth World Cups. We were going in the right direction. Had he not lost to Veljko Pjanovic's Serbian side, that was, man, that team was good. And they went
and they knocked out France, right?
Yeah.
They knocked out France in the quarterfinals. They lost in the quarterfinals they beat France in the 16s, lost in the quarterfinals. It felt like every time they were in a group, it was like the group of death, or they played the winner,
I think the 3 U20, I could have this wrong, for sure 2, but I think the 3 U20 eliminations were to the World Cup winner in that tournament. But the reason I bring that one up is because if I was covering that World Cup, if you go back and look at sort of the pundits and everyone who followed youth soccer, like, it was between the U.S. and Serbia that was going to win the World Cup, right? And they ended up meeting up in the quarterfinals. So it's not like we were that far away from it. And hopefully we get all of those teams back to playing in those tournaments at that level.
And I was going to say, what's crazy is in 2013, his first U20 World Cup, in his group of 4, he went Spain, he went France, and he went Ghana. And 3 of the 4 went on to the knockout stages. U.S. came in last, dead last. They tied France. That's the only point they got in that tournament. Now, France finished second in the group, Paul Pogba's team, might add, and they end up winning the World Cup. So think about that. Ghana, who finished third, went to a semifinal. So France and Ghana both ended up, running the gauntlet. But that just tells you how far he came as a U20 coach and some of the hurdles that he had throughout that process.
Yeah. So wait, he got a draw against the eventual champions?
Yes.
Sounds like me in 2006, baby, in the World Cup. Thanks for that, Chuck. That's going to end the show on a really high note. That's it. We're calling it. It's done. Call What You Want is done for today. Thank you again to Tab Ramos for coming on. Thank you, everybody, for listening and watching, as always.
Yes,
and
great chat.
We are going to come back and join you after the weekend. It's going to be a lot of fun, like always. Enjoy these next couple days, and we'll see you on the other side of it. Later. Peace out.